The wind howled like a hungry thing across the open plains, sweeping dust and dry grass in ghostly swirls under a sky the color of hammered iron. In the distance, thunder rumbled low and steady, like the drumbeat of something coming, something old, unkind, and without mercy. Ada Marin ran. Her skirts were torn, the hem caked in mud, one sleeve ripped clean from her shoulder. The leather of her boots had split at the seams, and still she ran, lungs burning, throat raw, the stitch in her side biting like a knife. Behind her, the faint echo of hooves had gone quiet. Either they'd lost her or were waiting for the next rise to flush her out like game. She didn't dare look back. Not since the trading post. Not since she'd plunged her knife into the belly of a man who'd thought he could buy her silence and take what he wanted. Her fingers still trembled from it. The year was 1865, and west of the Mississippi, law came slow, if it came at all. She had learned that in blood and breath, in the dark eyes of men who smiled too easily and reached too fast. Her husband, Daniel, had spoken of land and freedom, of a homestead to call their own. He hadn't lived to see the Missouri border. A fever took him before their wagon reached Kansas. The claim papers still burned a hole in her saddlebag, worthless without a name and a witness. Lightning forked across the sky ahead, cutting the land into momentary clarity. In that flash, she saw a stream below, swollen and fast. Her breath hitched. If she crossed it, she might shake them, or she might drown. She plunged in. The water was ice and teeth, pulling her under with a current faster than she'd gauged. Rocks scraped her shins. Something in her shoulder twisted painfully as she clawed at the far bank, gasping, sputtering, crawling onto dry ground like a half-drowned cat. Then silence. No hoofbeats. No shouts. Just the wind, and her heartbeat drumming like war inside her chest. She found shelter under a ridge of pines, half-hollowed by years of lightning and weather. Pulling her wet body into the narrow space, she tucked her legs to her chest and shivered. Night fell hard and black. Stars blinked open like old scars. Her fingers curled around the bone-handled knife at her waist. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She hadn't wept for Daniel, not properly, not since she buried him with her own hands in frozen prairie soil. Her stomach cramped. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. But hunger was easier to bear than fear. She closed her eyes, knife drawn across her knees, and listened to the dark. Sleep came slow and bitter. The sun rose cold and clear, baking her soaked clothes to her skin as she staggered on. Her mind wavered, flickering between memory and the present. She remembered Daniel's last breath, a soft exhale like wind through paper. The way he'd gripped her hand and whispered, "Keep going, Ada. Whatever it costs, you keep going." And so she had. By midday, her steps faltered. Her feet bled through torn stockings. The land stretched wide and cruel, no shelter in sight. When she saw the cabin, she thought it a mirage. It squatted low between hills, gray and solid, smoke curling from the chimney. A single corral stood half-collapsed nearby, and a mule grazed at the edge of the scrub. She froze at the tree line, unsure whether to trust her luck or turn and vanish before another man tried to own her. But the ache in her limbs, the emptiness in her belly, it won. She approached slow, knife sheathed but ready, watching the cabin like it might rear up and bite. The door opened before she reached the steps. The man who stepped out filled the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. His coat was worn raw at the cuffs, patched and restitched. In one hand he held a rifle, not quite aimed, but not idle either. His face, when she saw it, made her flinch. A jagged scar ran from the corner of his eye down to the base of his neck, raw and puckered where the beard refused to grow. The other side of his face might have once been handsome. Blue eyes, dark lashes, a square jaw lined with stubble. But the scar had changed the shape of him, turned his expression into something unreadable. They stared at each other for a long beat, the wind snapping between them. Then he spoke. "You lost, miss?" His voice was low, dry as dust, not cruel, not kind. Ada steadied herself. "I need water." A pause. The rifle didn't lower. "You bring trouble with you?" She met his gaze and held it, I am trouble. Something in his face twitched. A flicker of something old and near forgotten. Amusement, maybe. Then he stepped back. You'll find a pump out back. Don't steal nothing. Don't go inside. She nodded once, too tired for pride. The water was cold and tasted of iron, but it filled her belly and steadied her knees. She splashed it over her face and arms, scrubbing away the blood and sweat and fear. By the time she returned, he was sitting on the porch, the rifle across his lap. I don't run a way station, he said without looking at her. Ain't no room inside. I'll sleep in the barn. No barn. She glanced around, then under the porch. He studied her. The silence between them felt sharp. You got a name? Ada? He grunted. Creed. A beat passed. You always point guns at women who ask for water, Creed? Only the ones bleeding and looking over their shoulder like the devil's behind them. She sat on the top step, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from the cabin wall. Her bones ached with the promise of rest she couldn't afford. I killed a man, she said finally. He tried to. She stopped, looked away. He tried. Creed said nothing for a long while. Then, you got a warrant on you? No. You steal anything? No. You lie to me, I'll know. Ada looked at him. Do I look like I've got the strength to lie? He cracked the rifle open, checked the chamber, then snapped it shut. You can stay one night. Floor inside. You touch anything, you're gone. She nodded. The inside of the cabin was sparse, but solid. A stone hearth, a battered table, a single chair. Bedroll tucked in the corner. The air smelled of smoke, leather, and pine resin. She sank to the floor and leaned against the wall with a sigh. Creed didn't speak again that night. He tended the fire, cleaned a pan with the care of a man used to silence. He handed her a tin cup of beans and a crust of bread. She ate slowly, watching him move, the stiffness in his leg, the old pain stitched into his stride. When she woke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the chink in the shutters. Creed was already outside, splitting wood with practiced rhythm. She stepped onto the porch. You gonna send me on my way? He paused mid-swing. You want to stay? She hesitated. I want to be somewhere they don't find me. Creed leaned on the axe. Ain't no place like that out here. You'll either learn to stand or die on your knees. Ada swallowed. Then I'd rather stay standing. His eyes held hers. The wind caught the edge of her coat, flaring it like a flag. Behind them, the mule brayed lazily. The sky stretched wide and empty. He nodded once. You can help with the fence. She exhaled slowly. Her hands were still trembling, her knees weak, but she stepped off the porch and walked toward the tool shed. As she passed him, he said low, Don't mistake this for kindness, Ada. I ain't got none left. She didn't look back. I'm not asking for any. He watched her walk away. The prairie wind picked up again, rattling the dry grass, whispering through the trees like it knew something the rest of the world had forgotten. And the man who hadn't spoken a full sentence to another soul in 3 months stood there with his hands on the axe and wondered, for the first time in a long while, if he might not be as empty as he'd thought. The mornings came bitter and slow in the hills, the kind of cold that seeped through walls and skin, settling deep in the bones like regret. Ada rose each day with the frost, gathering kindling before the sun lifted fully above the ridgeline. Creed was always up first, the rhythmic sound of a blade against wood echoing through the stillness. They barely spoke at first. She swept floors and washed tinware. He mended fence posts and dug trenches for runoff. The work was honest, brutal in its simplicity. On the 5th morning, Ada found a splinter lodged deep beneath her nail. Blood welled as she tried to pull it out. Creed watched her from the porch, then tossed her a narrow blade without a word. She dug the splinter out in silence, jaw clenched tight, then handed the knife back. He gave a grunt that might have meant respect or nothing at all. The rhythm of life on the ranch grew familiar, even if comfort never quite followed. At night, they ate beside the fire. She sat cross-legged on the floor, he in the single wooden chair, the light flickering against the planes of his scarred face. He rarely looked at her directly, and when he did, it was as though he were still gauging whether she might vanish if he blinked. One evening, she found an old fiddle tucked beneath the cot, the strings rusted but intact. She ran her fingers along the wood, feeling the dust, the history. Creed saw her holding it and stiffened. "You play?" she asked. He nodded once. "Used to." She placed it back gently, sensing the wall around him thicken. She didn't ask again. A week passed before they shared more than a few clipped words. It was evening. The sky stretched wide and violet, the air carrying the scent of mesquite smoke and damp earth. She was patching a tear in the feed sack when she finally spoke. "How'd you get the scar?" He didn't answer right away, just kept whittling at a chunk of cedar, shaving thin curls that fell like feathers. "Gettysburg," he said at last. "Bayonet caught me when I went back for my brother. He didn't make it." The words dropped between them, heavy and final. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Creed shrugged, but his eyes didn't leave the blade in his hands. "War took a lot of men. Took more than it gave. Did it leave you anything?" He paused, then looked at her, really looked, the firelight catching the sharp edge of his expression. Silence. She understood. Loss had its own vocabulary, quiet things, empty chairs, unanswered prayers, the creak of a door that never closed the same after death. Later that night, when the wind picked up and rattled the shutters, Ada dreamed of wolves. Yellow eyes in the dark, teeth flashing beneath the moon. She woke, gasping, knife in hand, heart hammering like a drum. Creed was already up, rifle in his lap, watching the fire. "Bad dreams?" he asked without looking at her. "They don't feel like dreams," she murmured. He nodded. "They don't go away. You just learn to sleep with them." The next morning brought something worse than dreams. Creed found boot prints at the far edge of the property, near the ravine that marked the southern boundary. Too fresh to be from before the storm. He knelt beside them, fingers brushing the indentation in the earth. "Whoever it is," he said, "they were watching, standing here a while." Ada's breath hitched. Her voice dropped low. "You think it's them?" Creed looked at the trees, the hills, the open sky. Could be worse. He brought out an old saddle rifle, heavier than the one he carried day to day, and handed her a small revolver with a pearl grip. "You ever use one of these?" She nodded, though not with confidence. "Once. Time to remember how." He set up targets against a split log, ran her through drills. Her hands shook the first time she pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, splitting a branch instead of hitting the target. "Again," he said. By the fifth shot, she hit the edge. By the eighth, dead center. She lowered the pistol and met his gaze. He gave the faintest nod. "That'll do." She helped him set traps along the perimeter, strings of oldkins tied to fence posts, tripwires hidden under leaves. At night, she barely slept, listening for the metallic rattle, the creak of wood, the howl of wind, or worse. On the third night, something came. It wasn't men, but it was blood just the same. A cougar, drawn by the scent of the goats. It came silent and swift, claws flashing in the moonlight, a blur of motion in the dark. The scream of the animals jolted them both from sleep. Creed was already out the door, rifle in hand, barefoot in the cold. Ada grabbed the revolver and followed, heart pounding. The cougar had torn through the fence. One goat lay broken, another trying to scramble away on a shattered leg. Creed fired once, missed in the blur of motion. The cat turned, yellow eyes flashing, lips pulled back over long teeth. Ada didn't think. She raised the pistol and fired. The shot cracked the air. The animal staggered, then lunged. Creed stepped forward and drove the knife deep beneath the jaw, twisting as he went. The cougar thrashed once, twice, then fell still. Blood steamed in the cold. They stood in silence, the wind dying around them. "You got it," he said, finally. She was shaking. "I think I was aiming for its leg." "Good thing you missed." He leaned on the fence, breathing heavy, the edge of his shirt torn and dark with blood. "You're hurt." "Just a scratch." She helped him back to the cabin, forced him into the chair, and unbuttoned the torn fabric. The wound wasn't deep, but jagged, the edges already bruising. "You've done this before," he muttered as she cleaned it. "My husband took a bullet in the side. Back near St. Louis," she said quietly. "No doctor around. I had to learn." She stitched the gash with hands steadier than she'd expected. Creed watched her the whole time, eyes unreadable. You never said what happened to him. He died. Fever. Her voice caught. Before we got here. He nodded. Hard thing to be left behind. She looked at him. Isn't that what you did to your brother? The words slipped out before she could stop them, sharp and unkind. Creed didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened, and for a long moment she thought he might stand and leave. Instead, he said, Yeah, it is. She wanted to apologize, but the moment passed. He closed his eyes, leaned his head back against the wall. Get some sleep, he said. She curled near the fire, arms around her knees. Sleep didn't come. At dawn, she buried the goat while Creed reset the fencing. He didn't mention the question she'd asked, and she didn't repeat it. Something had shifted between them, not broken, but strained. Later that afternoon, while collecting eggs, she found a strip of red cloth snagged on a pine branch beyond the ravine. Fresh. She ran back, breathless. Creed listened, jaw tight. They're close. Then we should leave, she said. Pack up and go before they find us. No. Her eyes widened. Why? You'd rather stay and fight? I've spent too many years running from ghosts. This land's mine. Built it with my own hands. I'm not giving it up for bastards who can't win a fair fight. And me? He turned toward her. That's your choice. She hesitated. I want to stay, but I don't want to die. He looked down, then back. Then we make sure we don't. That night, she sat on the porch while he cleaned his rifle. The stars were bright overhead, sharp and cold. Why'd you help me? She asked finally. Back when I showed up? He paused. You looked like someone who'd already lost too much. So did you. He gave a soft huff, almost a laugh. Maybe we were both too stubborn to leave each other be. She smiled faintly. That sounds about right. They sat in silence, the firelight flickering behind them, the darkness pressing close around the cabin. Inside, the fiddle still waited beneath the cot. The traps were set. The guns were loaded. Whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. And though neither said it, a simple truth had begun to take root in the cold earth of that hill country. They weren't alone anymore. The storm rolled in just after dusk, long black clouds dragging across the horizon like bruises on the sky, the wind cold enough to feel like warning. Inside the cabin, the fire snapped and hissed, throwing fitful shadows across the floorboards. Ada moved quietly, gathering the last of the tools, laying the spare rifle near the hearth. Creed sat at the table, loading cartridges with slow, deliberate hands. Neither spoke. The silence had shifted from comfort to tension, the kind that comes when waiting is almost worse than what's coming. She glanced toward the window, the pain fogged from breath and firelight. They'll come tonight. He didn't answer right away. Then, reckon so. Outside, the traps had been set, the tripwires strung low, the rifles sighted in. But it wasn't the kind of fight you could prepare for with wood and steel. Not really. They were outnumbered. And though Creed was no stranger to killing, the war had taught him something a bullet never could. Most men don't die easy, and good men die just the same as wicked ones. Ada set a kettle on the stove, fingers trembling slightly as she poured water. What if we don't make it? We will. You don't know that. I don't need to. She turned to him, eyes searching. What happens if you die tonight? You ready to leave this place behind? He looked up, hands stilled over the ammunition. If it means keeping you breathing? Then yeah, I am. A gust of wind rattled the door. Ada stepped closer, voice soft. Why me, Creed? You could have sent me on my way a dozen times over. He studied her for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. Then, gently, because you stayed. The kettle began to whistle. Neither moved. Thunder cracked above them like the world splitting open. And then came the first knock, not polite, not hesitant. A hard, deliberate pounding that shook the door on its hinges. Ada reached for the revolver. Creed stood, rifle in hand, and stepped forward. Who's there? A voice answered, deep and slick as grease. Name's Harmon Clay. I believe you're keeping something that don't belong to you. Creed said nothing. Woman came through our post few weeks back. Clay continued. left with some things that weren't hers. Knifed a man. Now, we're willing to forgive all that if you just send her out. Ada's throat tightened. She stepped to Creed's side, gun steady. He raised his voice. You got 5 seconds to ride on. Now that ain't neighborly, Clay replied with a grin in his tone. We got 4 men here, Creed. You really think you can hold us off? Creed cocked the rifle. You're standing in range. Want to gamble on how many shots I need? There was silence. Then the sound of hooves shifting, a creak of leather, a whispered curse, and then the shooting started. The first shot blew out the window beside them, glass spraying across the floor. Creed returned fire, dropping to a crouch near the table. Ada ducked behind the hearth, heart thudding, pulse deafening. The revolver felt too small in her hands. A second shot cracked through the door, then a third, splintering wood. Creed fired again, once, twice. A scream rang out from outside. 1 man down. Ada crawled to the edge of the window, aimed and squeezed the trigger. The recoil jolted her arm, but the bullet found its mark. Another man staggered back into the mud. Creed moved like a ghost, slipping from cover to corner, reloading fast. The rifle snapped and bucked with every shot. Smoke thickened the room, but they were closing in. A boot slammed against the door. Ada fired again, missed, ducked just as a bullet tore through the wall inches from her face. Creed roared, kicked the door open, and fired point-blank into the chest of the man outside. The body crumpled like a sack of grain. 2 left. Lightning lit the yard. Ada saw one circling wide, trying to come around the back. She ran for the rear exit, threw it open, and stepped into the downpour. Mud swallowed her boots. The wind stole her breath. She caught a glimpse of movement near the shed, then the glint of metal. The man lunged. She fired. The shot went wide. He slammed into her, knocking the pistol loose, driving her to the ground. His hand closed around her throat. You should have stayed dead, girl. She clawed at his face, kicked, gasped for air. Rain poured over them both. A shot rang out, sharp and sudden. The man jerked, then collapsed beside her, eyes wide and empty. Creed stood a few feet away, soaked, panting, rifle lowered. You all right? She coughed, nodded, grabbed the revolver with trembling fingers. 1 more? He nodded grimly. Clay. They found him in the barn, crouched behind a stack of crates, loading his revolver. He looked up too late. Don't, Creed warned. Clay rose slowly, grin still in place. You don't got to do this. Creed, let the girl go. She ain't worth it. Creed stepped forward. She's worth more than every man you brought with you. Clay's eyes narrowed. This is the kind of trouble you end up buried for. Creed didn't flinch. Then start digging. Clay moved, fast but not fast enough. Ada fired. The bullet struck him in the chest, spinning him backward into the crates. He fell hard, the grin gone. The silence that followed was thick and strange. Not peaceful. Not yet. Rain battered the roof. Wind moaned through the trees. Creed looked at her. You shot him. Her hands trembled around the gun. I meant to scare him. Creed approached, took the revolver gently from her grip. You did more than that. She sank to the ground, knees in the mud, chest heaving. Creed crouched beside her. It's over, he said quietly. No, she whispered. It's just beginning. He understood what she meant. They buried the bodies at the far edge of the ravine, near where the cougar had fallen. Neither spoke during the work. There was no ceremony, just dirt, sweat, and rain. By morning, the storm had passed. The sky turned pale, the sun low and golden. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney again. Life, somehow, had resumed. Inside, Ada patched the bullet holes in the walls. Creed cleaned the weapons. They worked in silence, but the air between them had changed. Later, they sat on the porch, a blanket draped over their shoulders. Her head rested lightly against his arm. Still think I should have run? She asked. He glanced down. I think you did the braver thing. She looked up at him. Staying? He nodded. She smiled faintly. You think we'll be safe now? No, he said. But we'll be ready. A beat passed. You gonna play that fiddle someday? She asked. He chuckled. Maybe. You sing. Only when I'm sure no one's listening. She laughed soft, real. The first time she'd laughed like that in months. Creed turned toward her, blue eyes catching the last of the sun. "I never thought I'd want someone here," he said. "Never thought I'd trust anyone again." She reached for his hand. "Neither did I." They sat there until night returned, this time quiet, still. No wind, no threats, just the sound of crickets and the creak of old wood. When the stars emerged, bright and sharp, Ada looked up. "You ever think the frontier was a kind of test?" she asked. Creed nodded slowly. "Not just of the land. Of us." She squeezed his hand. "Then I hope we passed." He leaned in, pressed his forehead gently to hers. "We survived." The fire burned low inside the cabin. Beyond the hills, the horizon stretched wide and wild. And somewhere in the silence between the stars, it was clear they hadn't just found shelter, they'd found each other. So, what do we take from this tale? Maybe it's this. The frontier wasn't just a place, but a reckoning. A crucible that burned away the lies and left only truth. The truth of who you are when the storm comes. When the bullets fly. When the world forgets you. For Ada, it was never just about running. It was about finding a reason to stop. For Creed, it was never about the land. It was about what it could hold. If only he dared let someone in. And maybe that's the story worth remembering. If this tale moved you, share it with someone who's still searching for their place in the wilderness. Because even in the harshest places, love can still take root. The sun rose behind a veil of thin cloud, painting the hills in soft amber, but there was no peace in the morning. Not in Creed's eyes, not in the stiff set of Ada's shoulders as she stepped out onto the porch with her rifle slung low and her gaze sweeping the tree line. It had been a week since the shooting, a week since Harmon Clay and his men were buried in the ravine. But silence didn't mean safety. It meant waiting. The kind of waiting that gnawed at the nerves and twisted sleep into something sharp. Creed had barely slept. He kept the traps armed, the fire low, and the door never bolted. His gut told him what Ada already feared. Clay hadn't ridden alone. The man might be dead, but the stink of his gang hadn't been so easy to bury. "I don't like it," Ada said, her voice clipped low. "Too quiet. No riders on the horizon. No movement in the woods. It feels like they're just watching. They probably are." "You think it's more of them?" Creed nodded slowly. Clay had a brother. Wade. Mean bastard, likes to make men beg. He wasn't with the others that night. And Wade don't take kindly to his kin getting gunned down. Ada's hand tightened around the rifle stock. She didn't ask what Wade would want. She already knew. Men like that didn't come for justice. They came for spectacle. For blood. Creed stepped down from the porch, eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to draw him out. Hit first, not wait for him to come knocking." Ada followed. "And if we're wrong?" He glanced at her. "We won't be." They rode out before noon, following the ravine south toward the old mining trail where Clay's crew used to run stolen horses and whiskey. The land there was rough, cut with dry creek beds and scrub pine. Hard to move through, harder to track in. Perfect place for an ambush. Creed led, rifle across his saddle, his frame tense. He'd ridden into war with less weight on his chest. But this was different. This wasn't for flag. This was for something he'd nearly forgotten how to fight for. Someone. Ada rode behind, her hat pulled low, her eyes sharp beneath it. She'd become something new in the weeks since she'd fled the trading post, a woman hardened by fire, tempered by survival. But there was still softness in her, a fire that hadn't gone out. It was that spark Creed feared, losing most. By mid-afternoon, they reached the base of the trail. The horses skittered, uneasy, nostrils flaring. Creed raised a hand, signaling stop. "Something's wrong," Ada said, already dismounting. He nodded. "They're close." A shot rang out, then another. Dirt kicked up near Creed's feet. Ada hit the ground, rolled behind a rock. Creed dove the other way, returning fire with a clean, practiced aim. 3 riders crested the ridge ahead, rifles flashing in the sun. Ada fired once, missed, then again. One man screamed and fell from his saddle. The others dismounted, using boulders as cover. "We're pinned," she shouted. Creed crawled closer, checked the cylinder on his rifle. Not for long. They moved as one, circling wide through the underbrush, staying low, flanking without words. Creed took one high, drawing fire. Ada came in from the side, her breath loud in her ears, sweat stinging her eyes. She aimed carefully and fired. Another man dropped. Then the last one stepped into view. Tall, lean, wide-brimmed hat, eyes like rusted nails. Wade Clay. He smiled when he saw her. Not kindly. "You're the little widow, ha," he said, lowering his rifle. "Heard you put a bullet in my brother's chest. Man taught me everything I knew, and you what? Shot him from behind like a coward." Ada's jaw tightened. He was going to kill me. Should have let him. Creed emerged behind Wade, rifle raised. Wade didn't flinch. "Ah, the cripple. You shoot me, she won't sleep again. I'll haunt every blink of her eyes." Creed stepped closer. Better ghosts than monsters. He pulled the trigger. Click. Misfire. Wade turned. Fast. Too fast. Creed dropped the rifle and charged, tackling him into the dirt. They hit hard, rolled once. Fists flying. Blood. Grunts. The sound of knuckles on bone. Ada ran toward them, revolver up. But they were too tangled. Too close. Wade slammed Creed's head into ground. Once. Twice. Reached for knife. "Creed!" Ada shouted. Creed twisted, caught Wade's wrist. The blade glinted, then fell. Ada raised the revolver. "Move," she shouted. Creed rolled clear. She fired. Wade jerked back, stunned, but still alive. He laughed. "You really don't know how to kill, do you?" Creed stood, unsteady, picked up the knife. "No," he said, "but I do." The blade sank deep. Wade stiffened, mouth open in shock, then collapsed in the dirt. The wind shifted. Silence followed. Ada stared at the body. Creed staggered back, wiping blood from his mouth. His knuckles were raw, split open. She caught him as he fell to his knees. "You all right?" He coughed once, winced. "I've been better." She pressed her forehead to his. "You're alive. For now." They burned the bodies that night, a pyre set against the cliff. The smoke curled into the stars like a prayer or a warning. Whatever Clay's gang had been, it was finished now. The message was clear. They defended what was theirs. They rode home in silence, the trail behind them scorched and empty. Back at the cabin, Creed collapsed on the porch steps, head in his hands. Ada sat beside him, wordless. The fire inside the cabin still burned. The mule brayed softly in the dark. "You could have left," he said quietly. "I didn't wanna. Even now." She looked at him, especially now. He turned to her, pain deep in his eyes, not just from the fight, but from all the years before it. "I ain't a good man, Ada. I never asked you to be. I've done things I can't forget. So have I." He looked at her, searching, and she held his gaze without flinching. "You stayed," he said again. She nodded. "So did you." He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm. They sat like that until dawn broke, a soft, golden line rising beyond the far hills. By spring, the cabin had a second chair. The bullet holes were patched. A garden took root near the fence line. Ada tended it with care, humming under her breath. Sleeves rolled past her elbows. Creed watched her from the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. He'd started sleeping again. Not deeply, but better. One evening, she placed the fiddle in his hands and said, "Play." He hesitated, then lifted it to his chin. The sound was raw at first, rough with disuse, but it filled the space between them like light. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. When he stopped, she crossed the room and kissed him. It was slow, certain. He leaned his forehead against hers. "You're all I got." "No," she said softly. "We've got each other." And they did. Not just a cabin or a stretch of land, but something carved from fire and pain and survival, something real. So, what comes next? Maybe it's more work. Maybe more storms. Maybe the ghosts don't ever leave. But maybe, just maybe, the hardest part is already over. Because they're not running anymore. And in a world that tried to burn them down, they built something stronger, something worth fighting for.